authority to stop this, Mr. Jones. You're violating city code. With all due respect, ma'am, I have permits. You need to back off.
He's right, Carol. They took my land. We gotta fight this. I know. I have a plan.
You've got 72 hours to drain this thing before the county gets involved. That was the first sentence Linda Crawford shouted across my pond at 6:14 on a foggy Thursday morning while a yellow bulldozer idled behind her, diesel fumes rolling over the water. I stepped onto my dock and saw red survey stakes hammered all around the shoreline like somebody was marking a crime scene. Linda stood there holding a clipboard in one hand and a bright orange violation notice in the other. According to the HOA, my pond was now considered an unauthorized environmental modification. Then she pointed at the water and called it an eyesore in front of 3 neighbors recording on their phones. Right as she said it, a massive white koi surfaced beside the drain pipe near the cattails. That's when one of the contractors suddenly stopped walking and stared down into the water. "Upton," he said quietly. "Why is there concrete down there?" Linda ignored him and ordered the bulldozer closer anyway. By noon, every homeowner in Clearwater Pines had received the same email from the HOA board with drone photos of my property attached in bright red circles. Linda labeled the pond a high-risk unauthorized excavation site and warned residents that unstable groundwater could damage nearby foundations. 10 minutes later, my phone started blowing up with messages from neighbors asking if their insurance rates were about to go up because of me. I did not answer any of them. Instead, I walked into my garage, unlocked an old gray filing cabinet, and pulled out a stack of rolled survey maps tied together with faded blue tape. The contractor from that morning was still parked outside my fence smoking a cigarette when he suddenly waved me over. He pointed toward the south edge of the pond where the bulldozer tracks had sunk into the mud almost 6 inches deep overnight. Then he looked back at me and said, "I think your pond is connected to something bigger under this neighborhood." That evening, I unrolled the oldest survey map across my workbench and finally found the same symbol stamped beside my pond that I had seen earlier on the concrete below the waterline. It was not an HOA marking. It was a county drainage designation from 1981. The map showed something nobody in Clearwater Pines should have ignored before building 300 homes uphill from my property. A storm runoff channel ran directly beneath the subdivision and emptied into my pond through a reinforced concrete intake buried under the east bank. Suddenly the contractor's warning made sense. Around 7 o'clock, another bulldozer arrived with fresh gravel and steel plates, but this time the crew looked nervous. One of them climbed down into the muddy trench near the shoreline and hit something solid with his shovel. A loud hollow clang echoed under the ground. Then water started rushing through the exposed pipe hard enough to shake the dirt around it. Friday morning started with the sound of metal plates rattling across the cul-de-sac as the excavation crew rolled heavier equipment toward my fence line. Linda arrived wearing sunglasses and carrying printed copies of a new emergency motion the HOA had filed overnight to force immediate removal of what she now called a hazardous retention pit. She taped one copy directly to my mailbox while 2 workers began dumping gravel near the exposed pipe. 30 seconds later, the ground beneath the rear tire of the dump truck suddenly collapsed almost a foot into the mud. Everybody froze. Water blasted through the cracked soil underneath the gravel pile and streamed downhill toward the street drains. Then another problem hit. Sprinkler heads across 3 front lawns on the next block started shooting muddy brown water into the air at the exact same time. One homeowner ran outside yelling that her garage floor was flooding. That was when a white county pickup slowly turned into the neighborhood and stopped beside my pond. The man who stepped out of the county truck was not wearing a police uniform or anything dramatic. Khaki boots, reflective vest, clipboard. That was it. But the second he saw the exposed concrete pipe beside the pond, his entire expression changed. He walked straight past Linda while she tried explaining the HOA emergency order and crouched beside the muddy trench instead. Then he brushed dirt off the side of the pipe and uncovered a faded metal plate bolted into the concrete. I watched his eyes lock onto the serial number stamped across it. He immediately pulled out his phone and took 3 pictures before asking one question nobody there could answer. Who authorized excavation near this intake structure? Linda insisted the land belonged to the HOA jurisdiction now, but the county inspector cut her off and asked for subdivision drainage permits from 1998. The silence from the board members lasted almost 10 full seconds before he quietly said, "You people may have just disturbed protected infrastructure." Within an hour, 2 more county vehicles arrived carrying survey equipment and thick binders filled with drainage maps. The workers shut down every machine near the pond while inspectors pushed metal probes into the ground around the exposed intake line. Linda kept insisting the HOA had authority over all exterior water features inside the subdivision, but nobody from the county even acknowledged her anymore. One inspector unfolded a laminated floodplain diagram across the hood of his truck and traced a blue line straight through the center of Clearwater Pines before stopping at my property. That was when several homeowners nearby realized the pond was not decorative at all. It was part of the neighborhood drainage system the builders buried decades earlier. Then another discovery hit. One of the surveyors uncovered fresh gravel packed directly over a secondary overflow valve the excavation crew had nearly sealed shut that morning. The lead inspector immediately grabbed his radio and said, "Call the state environmental office." This just escalated. State environmental officials showed up just before sunset carrying waterproof cases, laser measuring tools, and archived engineering records older than most of the houses in Clearwater Pines. The second they compared the exposed intake pipe to the original county schematics, the entire atmosphere shifted. One official walked directly to Linda and asked whether the HOA had filed a disturbance permit before authorizing excavation near regulated runoff controls. She admitted they had not because they believed the pond was private landscaping. That answer triggered immediate photographs, site markers, and a temporary stop order taped onto the bulldozer windshield. Then the lead engineer uncovered something that stunned everybody standing there. Beneath the mud near the shoreline was a brass survey marker stamped with the exact coordinates from the State Flood Management Archive. The pond was officially registered infrastructure. Worse for the HOA, the engineer quietly explained that sealing the overflow valve could have redirected stormwater straight into dozens of nearby homes during heavy rain. The emergency HOA meeting that night was packed so tightly people were standing along the walls holding copies of county notices on their phones. Linda tried opening with property value concerns again, but nobody cared anymore after state officials projected the original flood routing maps onto the clubhouse screen. The entire room went quiet when the engineer highlighted how stormwater from nearly every street in Clearwater Pines funneled toward my pond during heavy rainfall. Then he revealed something even worse for the board. According to archive development permits, the subdivision builders were legally required to preserve the retention system exactly as it was decades ago. Several residents immediately turned toward Linda after learning the HOA had authorized excavation without reviewing a single county drainage record first. One homeowner demanded to know whether their flooded garage that morning was connected to the digging near the overflow valve. Before Linda could answer, a state investigator stepped forward and announced they were opening a formal compliance review into the HOA board. 3 weeks later, every red survey stake around my pond had been replaced with permanent state markers bolted into fresh concrete along the shoreline. The bulldozers were gone. So was Linda. After the compliance investigation expanded, the HOA quietly withdrew every violation notice, cancelled the fines, and approved emergency repairs for the drainage damage caused during the excavation. Residents who used to complain about the pond were now attending county briefings. After learning their entire subdivision depended on the retention system beneath my property to prevent major flooding during storm season. One afternoon, a state contractor installed a new metal sign beside the water that officially identified the site as protected flood control infrastructure. I watched 2 kids fishing near the cattails while county engineers inspected the restored overflow valve under the east bank. Then one of them handed me a copy of the final report. Across the top, in bold letters, it read, "Unauthorized HOA interference created substantial regional flood risk."